You're listening to Data Science Leaders, the premier podcast for executives tackling the world's most important challenges using the power of machine learning. Let's dive in. Hello and welcome to the Data Science Leaders podcast. Today we are going to be tackling that fascinating issue that really affects both all of us and really has a huge potential societal impact, and that is artificial intelligence in education. And we are extremely fortunate to have with us Stephen Koslin. And I'm prone to hyperbole, but I really do mean it this time when I say that I really cannot envision anybody being better equipped to speak to this topic than Stephen Koslin. Stephen was the former chair of the Department of Psychology at Harvard University, then the Dean of Social Sciences at Harvard. He was formerly the director for the Center for Advanced Study in the Behavioral Sciences before being a professor of psychology at Stanford. He's the founding dean and chief academic officer at Minerva University and is now the president of Active Learning Sciences, where he helps educate the educators when it comes to advanced techniques and technologies. And this is in addition to the 15 books that he has written on cognition, communication, and the science of learning, of which the most recent one is Active Learning with AI, a practical guide that is out either at this moment or will be out very shortly. Stephen, welcome to the Data Science Leaders podcast.
Shel, thank you for such a kind introduction. It's a real pleasure to be here.
Stephen, I would like to start with that perpetual misnomer that artificial intelligence is about making hyper-intelligent brains that can make better decisions than we are. And the sense that I get from your book is that no, that isn't the case at all. It's really much more about making ourselves more intelligent, about improving our education, about helping ourselves learn faster.
Yeah, that's exactly how I think of it. I think of artificial intelligence as a cognitive amplifier. So what I mean by that is it helps to cover for our cognitive weaknesses, but also augments our cognitive strengths. So we get it both ways. It's not just a partner. It has no agenda, obviously, of its own. It needs to be directed by us, shaped by our goals, and responds to what we ask and what we request. So the trick is, of course, to understand ourselves well enough to know where we need to invoke its able assistance.
Absolutely. But it sounds like it goes beyond providing tools that help us make better decisions or that detect anomalies, detect things that we need to react towards. But it sounds like it also helps with our own education to become better, more competent, more intelligent individuals. Have you been seeing that as well as being a superpower of artificial intelligence, if you will?
Oh, absolutely. I think, in fact, this book of mine that's just coming out is really about three things, which is using AI to design educational programs at every level of granularity, using it to deliver them, and then using it to assess them. And it turns out AI, it's amazing what it can do at every one of these stages. It's absolutely remarkable. What part particularly excites me is it invites a new kind of teaching modality, which can be extremely effective, really easy to scale, and actually quite inexpensive. So it's opening up gigantic opportunities. I'm happy to say more about what I mean if you want to go down that way.
Yes, well, I'm imagining you're talking about active learning. And when it comes, if you could tell us a little bit about active learning and also about how artificial intelligence and particularly generative AI makes that more scalable or more effective than it was previously.
Yeah, so a lot of people think of active learning as learning by doing, which I don't think is quite right. There's a pretty good literature now showing that exploratory, inquiry-based, sort of unstructured active learning, if you want to call it that, is not effective. Actually, it doesn't work. I mean, what you need a learning objective where they're actually using knowledge or skills in some way towards achieving that learning objective. It's got to be directed. I think of active learning is learning by using, where they've got specific information, specific goals in mind. And one of the cool things about AI is it can really facilitate that. at multiple different levels.
And here, obviously, we should call out for our audience who's very data science oriented that we're talking about active learning in a different sense here. We're not talking about the active learning, the machine learning technique. We're talking about active learning, the pedagogical technique, versus in contrast to passive learning, which I think we've all known for a long time is really not as effective.
That's right. There's a huge literature on this now. That it's just astounding how much better having people actually use what they're taught is for actually having them understand, not only understand it, but remember it and know how to apply it. So there's really a lot of the literature actually comes out of the physics community for historical reasons in part, but it's really quite compelling at this point. To the point where some people have questioned whether it's even ethical to continue traditional lecture-based learning, which I think there's a place for lectures. I mean, this modality that I'm really excited about uses a learning management system like Canvas or Blackboard or Moodle or something for information transmission for content delivery, and then uses these AIs to have actual interactions where they use the information in problem solving, debates, role playing. You can have the AI assign the user, the learner, one role out of four, and then it'll play the other three roles in a role playing game. It's really quite effective at doing this. And by the way, in the background, assesses how well the learner is actually doing towards achieving a learning objective. So you can give it a rubric, a table where you indicate for a score of 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, what has to be present. And it'll track it, and it'll be able to justify afterwards why it gives certain kind of feedback and so on. It's actually quite remarkable how well it does these things. And when I say it, I'm referring primarily to GPT-4, by the way, which is substantially better than 3.5 was.
Yes. Well, I mean, active learning, it's at least it's always struck me, has that critical problem that it's very difficult to do on your own. You certainly can do it, but we tend to get lazy. We don't do enough work to go in and to make it work for just an individual. At best, we open up a Duolingo style application and we test ourselves. We go in and we write quizzes for ourselves to go in and try and force ourselves to do it. It sounds like the real opportunity here on the artificial intelligence side is that it makes it possible to do this for the individual, and naturally also it makes it possible for groups as well. But that ability now to have your own personalized instructor or trainer who can work with you and provide that variety and those iterations feels like that's where the big new development is. But is that fair, or is it elsewhere as well?
Yeah, no, it is fair, but there is a problem, the flip side of what you're saying. That is, if you take the exact same prompt and you enter it twice, you get different results. Part of it is because it's not zero temperature. That is, that there's some randomness built into the algorithm. But part of it has to do with the fact it's running on machines where it's trying to get it to go faster. So they do various things that are going to result in different memory allocation and things like that actually end up having an effect on what it ends up doing. So the bottom line is there's really two ways to approach, at least that I've worked out, using AI in education. And which way you do it depends partly on your learning objectives. One way is what you said. You give it a prompt to initiate a debate with a certain my prompts are often more than a page long, by the way. They're really quite complex because I have learning principles that I wanted to use, and I want to set the level, and I want to set the learning objective, and sometimes I'll know in advance what their hobbies or interests are, so I want to tailor it to that, and so forth. It does all this stuff just fine. But as I say, even if you tell it you want a debate or role play or something like that, it's going to do it differently. So that's not a problem in many cases, depending on what the learning objective is. But there are cases where you really want control over exactly what happens. So for that, you can actually run it several times as a course designer or instructor, pick out the one you like best, actually edit it, and deliver that so that it's specific instructions and even specific steps to go through and so forth for some kind of active learning, and follow it up with the real time interaction, which will allow you to have the AI use the rubric and give them either formative feedback, that is just to help them learn, or actually evaluate them for some kind of a grade. So I think it's always good to have the interaction at the end, but before that, sometimes it's better to prepackage exactly what you want to have happen as opposed to let the AI make the decisions. It just depends.
Yeah, so there's part of this is that, well, it's not a bug, it's a feature. It's its ability to provide that variation helps from an educational point of view. But if you take that to the extreme, the most extreme variation is is a hallucination, and so we're all worried about it then going in and teaching facts that is made up. Are there ways? Do we need to be as worried as everybody is about that? Are there easy techniques to go in and constrain this so that we don't you don't end up learning incorrect facts along the way?
Right. So the first thing to keep in mind, it's not Google. Don't use these generative AIs as information retrieval devices. It's really not what they're best at. So if you use them the way that we use them for active learning, there really isn't a problem, because you tell it what the learning objective is. You tell it various other things that, in terms of context for that, what the learners know, what level they've got, whatever, what's going to be relevant. And then it's about learning by using. So it's not actually providing any new information. It's helping the learner use what they've already been exposed to. So I think of it in terms of a learning sandwich, where there's two varieties. One is the so-called front-loaded, where you give them a little lecture or have them watch a video, some way of conveying information, which they're not going to remember just based on that. 10% maybe a month later, if that. But then go to the meat, the middle of the sandwich, which is the active learning, where they use that information somehow. In that book that I wrote, there are dozens and dozens of different ways you can have them use it. I could go through a list, but take the rest of this time we have. And then after that, you have some kind of debrief to see, in fact, what they did and whether it was reasonable or not. So the AI is really good. Not so much for the first part. You can use a video of a human doing a PowerPoint presentation if you want, but it's good at conducting the active learning. In fact, it's good at designing, working with it. And then the debrief, for having them talk through what they got out of it and so forth, and having a rubric in the background. And it's really quite good at that. So the way we use it sort of sidesteps the whole hallucination problem, because we're not asking it to retrieve facts and tutor. We're not doing it that way.
It makes sense. Well, it sounds like what you're describing is extraordinarily valuable for the educator. It takes a lot of things that would have taken an extraordinary amount of time, both when it comes to creating the lecture, creating that the active learning exercises, and then providing that personalized feedback. And so now, for the educator, you can now scale this in a way that was very difficult previously. It sounds like there's also then benefits for the student as well, because they can then presumably go in and take those exercises and do those over and over again and get that feedback over and over again. And so instead of this being a one and done, I've got a very limited set of opportunities to go through this exercise. I can go through and it sounded like deliberate practice is one of the key principles in your book. And it sounds like that opportunity for deliberate practice is there in a way that very difficult to do before.
Absolutely right. In fact, here is an example of turning what might be viewed as a bug into a feature. The fact that the same prompt is going to result in different things is terrific from the point of view of a student who wants to come at the same learning objective from different angles. And you're right. Part of the point of the debrief, the last part of the learning sandwich, is to give them deliberate practice, which is where it helps them to identify where the rough spots are. So it's not just doing the same thing over and over again, practice, mindless practice, but it's zeroing in on where you're having trouble and allocating disproportionate effort to working on those rough spots. So AI can help you a lot with that.
Now, I think a lot of folks are worried, myself included, as a parent of young kids, that one of the problems with generative AI is that it makes it so easy for them to cheat on their homework, and it's so difficult to detect. So naturally, we're worried where what the teachers were often doing with homework or with exercises or essays or other things was trying to create that active learning opportunity, and now it becomes very easy for kids to sidestep that. Are there, do we need to be as worried as we are? Or is this certainly affects educators in terms of, one of their key tools they need to use in a very different fashion? Is there an easy way that we can get around that?
Yeah, I think there is actually. I think there are two things. One is because of the random pieces built into the algorithm, no two interactions are going to be the same. So have them turn in the transcripts. If they're identical, they just took one from somebody else. So you can't really cheat that way to turn it in. The other thing is going to the debrief phase. That interaction can be designed to have the AI really drill down and figure out what they actually know. And it's going to be a different conversation for each student. So forget about exams. Forget about having them write papers. Have them write papers with the AI. If the idea is to get product good, have them do that and have them edit it and explain why they're editing it the way they are. And then you can have the AI decide whether it makes sense or not. So you can use the AI in lots and lots of different ways. But the bottom line is assume that almost anything you ask, they're going to try to have the AI do it for them. So what you need is a real-time interaction as soon as possible after whatever they do, where they're asked deeper questions about it. Why did you do it this way? Okay, justify, explain. And that's done in real time. So you don't give them a chance to run the AI. They don't know what the questions are going to be, to answer questions they don't know what they are, because the questions are coming up in real time. And there are follow-up questions. I mean, the beauty of these interactions with generative AI is that it rolls with the punches. I mean, you can ask question upon question upon question, and you can't anticipate them so well in advance. So I think you have to sort of realize that you need to take a step back and say, all right, what was the point of assigning an essay? Well, we wanted to know if they really understood it and could see the implications of it. Okay, well, there are other ways to get at that. What was the point of assigning this quiz? Well, we wanted to know if they'd actually memorize, learn this stuff. Okay, we can get that in other ways. And we can do it in ways that are very hard to anticipate and cheap.
Well, I mean, it almost sounds like we're going back to earlier modalities of teaching. So I'm thinking of almost ancient Greek approaches where it's much more, it's dialogue based. And so dialogue or conversational. Now, it doesn't need to literally be conversational. Be sure there are ways in which we can make it literally conversational. But even if it is just the person is typing back responses, it's moving towards a interactive modality versus one which is more around either write a test, answer these questions, or one which is write an essay around.
Absolutely correct. And the thing that I like is it's very hard to fake your way through because it will ask you follow-up questions. So you can drill down, you can have it drill down and figure out what they really know. And you can, as I said before, you can give it rubrics that it can guide. It can use it to guide its inquiry so that by the end, it is asked questions that are relevant to every point of the rubric and can actually assign a score.
This sounds like the ultimate teaching assistant in terms of, being able to run recitation sessions and go in and have that interaction with every one of your students in a way that it's difficult for you as an instructor to be doing. But not the right way to think about it?
No, I do. I worry about that way of framing it because it sounds very threatening to instructors. So I think that there's a real role, more than one role, for instructors. It's just not what it was before. That we need instructors to help motivate students. We need instructors to help diagnose what the cognitive bugs are, and help them be motivated and inspired and directed to persevere. There's a human touch. It's more like a facilitator than an instructor, but you still need to know the stuff in order to help the students, the learners navigate through the material. So I think a lot of the instruction was probably taken over by books back in Gutenberg's day. And I can imagine instructors and tutors being threatened and worried about the, onslaught of these published dead pages, which no longer are animated, and yet they're instructing people on how to do things. And yet there was still a role for instructors. I love this distinction between data and information and knowledge and wisdom. I've forgotten who did this, not me. Somebody set up that 4-level hierarchy where the idea was that, data gets interpreted, so it becomes information, but information then gets embedded in context, so it becomes knowledge. And then the knowledge is put in this broad perspective to become wisdom. That's my abbreviation for what whoever it was did it. I apologize to whoever came up with that. It's a really good idea. Came across it years ago. But the idea is that instructors can help a lot with ascending that. In particular, the last couple of levels, because there's a lot of humanity that's necessary to really understand context and perspective.
Well, one of the things that struck me about what you were saying is how reminiscent that feels, or how much I recognize in myself as a parent, in the roles that I need to do with my kids, or indeed as a manager in terms of the folks on my team who are not as experienced in particular tasks. So it sounds like, yes, we're talking about instructor as in somebody who has this as a profession, but it sounds like these techniques and these tools will hopefully eventually be available to us for more broadly as well.
Oh, without question. One of the companies I'm working with is doing exactly that right now, which is in stealth mode, so I can't talk about it. But that you just nicely framed what they're up to.
Excellent. Oh, I'm looking I hope they do it before my kids grow up too quickly.
Oh, the prototype runs already. It runs pretty well, actually.
Wonderful. Now there is that also that question about the adoption of these techniques. And educators don't always have the best reputation of being at the vanguard of adoption of the latest technologies. Sometimes, whether deserved or undeserved. What are the challenges that you see of adoption here? Is there some way that we can short circuit the usual time that it takes for best practices to diffuse throughout any organization, not just education? I mean, healthcare and the business world, manufacturing, we all have similar challenges. But is there a shortcut? What are you seeing the most successful teachers and institutions do?
Yeah, so you're absolutely right. Academia in general is very traditional, very slow to change, which you can justify in some ways, right? I mean, it's the trade-offs are you don't want to use learners as experimental subjects. I mean, you really have to be careful what you're doing and try to do the best you possibly can. So change tends to be slow, and also faculty are comfortable with how they were taught, what they learned, and it seemed to work out well enough for them. So they're not especially motivated to change it. So my own particular view is that it's sort of Clayton Christensen's disruptive ideas. That is, we're not going to change U.S. Steel to adopt different and more efficient methods of making steel and so forth. What's going to happen is there are going to be these little boutique steel mills that initially are probably not turning out as good as quality because they're experimenting and can quickly pivot and adopt new techniques as they get more feedback. And eventually they get something really good that's actually very scalable and cheap. And before you know it, they're nipping at the heels of the big guys. So I'm thinking that there's going to be whole new ways of teaching, like this idea of combining a learning management system for content delivery where you can integrate active learning into that also, by the way, having it pause and they have to answer some questions before it can go on with a lecture, that sort of stuff that Canvas Studio already does. But you can also integrate into that access to one of these large language models where it's been set up. In fact, my company is developing software right now that does exactly this. It automates that book I wrote, basically. So the software stands between the learning management system. So the software is in the middle of the learning management system, the student, the learner, and the LLM. And what it does is it stores information like prompts that we've set up, information we've gotten about the students' hobbies and interests and stuff, various other kinds of things that are in there that allow the LLM to remember, quote unquote, previous interactions, because yes, after you chat, it wipes out what it had temporarily stored. So we save all that. Every transcript is in there. But it's set up, this new piece of software we call the Sidecar is set up to facilitate active learning as a plugin to a learning management system. So when you're going through modules in the learning management system, when you get to an assignment that is about active learning, you don't know it, but you're actually taken to our software, which then takes you to the LLMs. We can swap in different LLMs, by the way. So you think you're just interacting directly with the LLM, but in fact, we've modified what's going on to be more appropriate for you. And we've got the prompt in there with the various switches and stuff built into it so that it can adapt quite well on top of the LLM to give you an even better experience that you would have had otherwise. So I think this whole thing is going to be extremely inexpensive to run and very, very scalable. And we'll use active learning techniques that have been shown empirically to be effective. It's not just that they're rooted in these principles of active learning that I pulled out in literature, the 5 principles, but rather people have done studies on various aspects of this showing that, in fact, better outcomes. We can use all that. So it can be very cheap, very easily scaled all over the world, I hope.
Well, I'm reminded of Arthur C. Clarke's book version of 2001, A Space Odyssey, where he was predicting that folks through revolutions in education would be able to do a PhD in university through PhD in a year or two instead of the, for some folks like me, if you count them all up, some 23 years of my life that went through education. Would you see that the big societal benefits here is potentially to make education a lot more effective, a lot more shorter, and also potentially to open up far more opportunities for continuous learning and active learning. Are those what we should expect, or are there other societal implications that you would see of making education that much more effective?
Well, I think of it as democratizing it in that a lot of people have to work. So they're going to take these kind of courses in the evenings or weekends, time of their convenience. And right now, what they get are these typically pretty flat, LMS-based courses where a lot of reading and, just distance ed type stuff, not very inspiring, not very exciting, and not very effective. So I think we're going to what we're going to do is blur the distinction between synchronous and asynchronous. So synchronous instruction is where is real-time interaction. Like what we're doing now is virtual, but the traditional ways in a classroom. And the big virtue of that is you get rapid feedback, baud rate, way higher. Asynchronous is typically via a learning management system, where it's a set of modules that you go through and you read and you check things off and so forth. Not very inspiring. But you can do it in the evening, you can do it in the weekends. I think we're going to have the best of both worlds. I think we're going to have the asynchronous stuff for content delivery, but you'll have the rapid real-time interaction with an AI that'll help you actually learn by using the material. So you'll actually get it. And we can teach anything this way. So if you want to do liberal arts, do that. If you want to do stuff that'll help you get a better job, we can do that.
One of the things struck me in my brief teaching career was just how much I learned about my students through interaction with them, through that, especially when I had those opportunities to have dialogues with them and to find out more about them, and to ask them broader sets of questions, and not just both on the material. I could then understand a lot more about how they processed information, how they thought, but I also learned an incredible amount them both in terms of their work and study habits, etc. Through these tools, you have the opportunity to really learn an incredible amount about the student, and indeed you need to in order to be able to design the activities and education plan as effectively as possible. Obviously, some folks would be worried about the privacy issues around that, but are there also opportunities here about that level of understanding to then provide better guidance to that student about what it is they are most suitable for occupationally, or indeed about either cognitive biases that might hinder their thinking going forward, or even potentially about neurological disorders or that they might need to overcome. What do you see on the flip side of it, not just on the knowledge retention side, but also in terms of that additional view of the individual?
Yeah, one of the companies that I'm involved in is called Mindstone. It's out of the UK. The CEO is a guy named Joshua Woolley. And this is pretty much what they're trying to do. You did a nice job of summarizing a lot of their goals, not all of them. The idea is that they will be a portal where you can take courses or interact with various things on the internet. And in the background, they will be extracting certain kinds of information. All of this is very, very transparent. And the goal is to give you a profile of your own skills that'll then allow you to compare the skills you've got with skills necessary for, say, a job you want. You can think about this in vector space, obviously, and help you identify what you need to drill down and study in order to get the job you want. So, and in fact, they will even certify this profile that they generate, which employers might find of interest. So Mindstone, I think it's a really promising approach. And yes, there are issues which they're very aware of. So I think the key is absolute transparency, which I think is their approach.
Well, I guess I was wondering whether or not there's also a regulatory aspect of it. Now, regulation can also often kill off all sorts of innovation here, but it sounds like maybe regulating on the use of that information by, say, employers maybe would help prevent some of potential misuse and hence worry about adoption.
Yeah, in the United States, we have this FERPA set of rules, right, which are intended for underage I guess students in general, if I remember right. But something like that is going to be necessary. I don't think there's any question about it. I think it's a good time for regulatory bodies to take a step back and try to look where things are going, just not where they are now, and think about what's in the best interest of everyone. So you don't want to kill the golden goose, strangle the baby in the cradle. How many other cliches can I come up with to express this idea? Yeah, you don't want to do that. But on the other hand, we got to be mindful of individuals' rights and privacy. So I think a key is absolute transparency, and individuals have to control their own data. I think that's absolutely clear.
So in terms of timing for this, when it comes to innovations in education, they often need to go through a couple of cycles before they become mainstream. So I'm thinking of the MOOCs recently, or before them came in the late 90s. We had any number of universities that were trying for massive distance education there. So there often can be a decade, sometimes longer time between when the idea comes and when someone is successful with them. With AI, everything seems to be moving a lot faster. Do you have a sense of when, say, public schools might be leveraging these techniques in a large fashion? Is this something where no, actually, there's reasons to be optimistic that this could happen within 2 to 3 years, or is this more of a It's coming. It'll be much more narrow and targeted towards specific use cases and specific channels, if you will, for education. But it might take longer. It might be another 10 years before this really affects the mass education system. What's your sense?
My sense is going to be huge variability, that it's going to depend a lot in the United States anyway, on not just what state you're in, but what school district you're in. And so some places have a greater appetite for innovation than others, and some have a greater emphasis on control. So one of the things about AI is once you're in there, you ask questions and it's going to give you feedback. I mean, I'm told that there are districts in the United States that have outlawed critical thinking on the curriculum. I don't know if that's true. I've been told it. But if it is true, that's going to be a problem for them if they're going to let AIs enter the classroom. So I think there'll be big disparities, which in my own view is unfortunate, because I think if AIs are used appropriately, they're incredibly helpful in education. That's A. B, I saw a statistic recently that there are hundreds of thousands of homeschool academies, or what do you want to call them, that sometimes only 10 or 12 students involved, but it's an organized entity. It's not just the parents doing the homeschooling. So this is the Clayton Christensen little boutique steel mill on the side. I think you're going to see off on the side a lot of institutions growing up that provide a very good education uh, inexpensively from anywhere to learners who want it.
It almost sounds like we'll need to take a lot more personal responsibility for our AI education journey, so to speak, in the sense of that either as a parent or as a professional looking to develop our skills, that we will be the ones going in and seeking these as products that we can use in order to develop those, more than that it necessarily will be done for us by the school system or even potentially by our university.
Well, I think there's already some of that. I mean, there are independent schools all over the United States, and some parents will shop around for which independent school is most appropriate for their particular children. They already do that. So this may just expand that to where it's not just bricks and mortar schools, but it's going to be virtual and hybrid. By the way, I think it's very important that there be actual face-to-face interactions. It can't all just be video. It can't all just be virtual. So I think you're going to see that the norm is going to be some kind of a hybrid where there are three components. There's the async uh, information transmission via video, recorded lecture, reading, all that kind of thing. There's going to be the active learning, which can be large part, via interactions with AI, different kinds of interactions. And then there's going to be the human interaction part. And the AI can play a role in that. So I mentioned earlier that there are different ways to have AI involved in setting up active learning, all of which are necessarily involved in real-time interaction with it. You can set up stuff in advance. So, for example, for these real-time in-person sessions, AI can play a role in figuring out what to have them do when they get together. That bears on the curriculum that it's been playing a major role in. So AI is going to be pervasive, including in helping figure out how to actually get the most out of the in-person components, because that's going to be an inconvenience for parents and so on. They have to bring their kids somewhere. But I think it's worth it. I really think at least once a week for a couple hours, getting kids together just in an educational setting, not just play, I think is really important.
Wonderful. For parents, it sounds like there are opportunities and there are applications that are coming and that there are services that are coming. For educators, are there ways in which they can get started on their journey to learn how to use these techniques better? I'm imagining that probably your book is likely the best way to do this. Is that the way to do it, or are there other ways that you would suggest?
There's a guy at Penn, University of Pennsylvania, named Ethan Mollick, who has been writing a Substack blog called One Useful Thing. And a lot of that's pretty good. He's quite broad, and it's actually worth reading. And he cites other people in his blog as well. So that's a place to start, I would say. I don't know him, by the way, so I'm just giving a plug based totally on subscribing and reading it. It's free.
Well, I definitely feel like they should also be getting your book. Again, it's called Active Learning with AI, A Practical Guide. On my side, I was astounded by just how much practical advice, very down to the level of sample prompts that folks can use in order to generate not just the learning plans, but also the different activities that you can use in the classroom. Stephen, thank you very much for your time and your thoughts. If folks want to get in touch with you, is there a good way to do that?
Oh, absolutely. Active Learning Sciences has a website. It's www.activelearningsciences.com. And they can simply send me a note, or they can just send it at scosland@activelearningsciences.com. I'm more than happy to follow up with anybody who's interested. And thank you for the kind words about the book, by the way. I appreciate that.
My pleasure. And again, Stephen, thank you very, very much for your time. It's been a pleasure having you on the Data Science Leaders podcast. You've been listening to Data Science Leaders from Domino Data Lab. If you found our discussion insightful, be sure to subscribe to never miss an episode. Your support helps us deliver cutting-edge content and keep the data science community informed and inspired. We appreciate every review. Until next time.